Hello, true crimeers. I have another compilation video for you. One day I'll probably be finished with these. I have so many videos over there on TikTok. My goodness. Don't worry, I will have a full-length single true crime story for you tomorrow on Sunday, like I always do. And there will be a change to my posting schedule again. I will let you guys know that on Monday or Tuesday. So, this compilation video, I'm combining two playlists. It's part of the Worst Deaths series, but these two themes are Worst Animal Attacks and also Worst Unusual Deaths. So this is every video I had from both of those playlists. This is going to be 23 stories. And I'm just going to throw them at you willy-nilly, even though you're going to see them numbered, like, oh, number 12, number whatever. I'm going to upload these randomly in random order, so it's not all animal deaths first, then all unusual deaths next. It'll be a mixy-matchy, so maybe that's fun for you, or not, because this is about death, so it's not fun whatsoever. By the way, a little drinking game, take a shot every time I say the phrase, "Unfortunately, I don't have a photograph of the person." You'll be sloshed within, I don't know, a few minutes or so. So have fun with that. At any rate, here is 23 stories of unusual deaths or animal attack related deaths. Viewer discretion is advised. Oh my fuck. This is not only one of the most unusual deaths, but it's also one of the most insane stories I think I've ever told on this page. This is Worst Unusual Deaths, number 9. Viewer discretion is advised. I don't have any confirmed photographs of the man, but 31-year-old Daniel John O'Brien was in Trinidad on vacation with some friends. He apparently had mental health issues and was allegedly not able to get the medication he needed. On a January 1990 afternoon in their hotel room, Daniel's friend and bunkmate would wake up with Daniel's hands around his throat. He was straddling him and trying to choke him. Daniel's friend takes a nearby lamp and he smashes it across Daniel's head, which gets him to fall off the bed. Daniel then takes off every article of clothing, grabs the fire extinguisher in the hallway, begins to run down and start spraying the fire extinguisher stuff down his throat. Now, they were also really close to the airport. There was a chain link fence with barbed wire on top separating, the outside world from the runway. Daniel, again nude, jumps over not one, but 2 fences like this and begins to run onto the runway of this airport. Now, security guards were there and they were able to chase after him and get him to the ground, and then they put him in one of their Jeeps. This is just a scene from a movie. And that's kind of what the story is like. Now, apparently Daniel wasn't cuffed or had anything to kind of like securing his hands behind his back. When he was then able to, I guess, either elbow or punch the officer next to him, and then he chokes the driver of the car to the point where the driver stops, and then Daniel takes him and throws him out of the car. Daniel then drives the Jeep towards a plane that was being taxied. The engine was basically going full speed. He crashed the Jeep into the plane. It didn't cause this explosion, and it tore the roof off of the Jeep. And he had one more thing left to do. Now, after the fact, they believe that obviously his lack of medication plus his mental health issues would cause him to obviously go way over the edge. But as the plane's engine is going almost at full speed at this point, Daniel manages to jump somehow in front of the engine when it then sucks him in and it obliterates his body. Witnesses described it as his body was literally minced to death, and his body parts literally flew all over the runway. Yes, this is a real story, by the way. You can find several sites talking about it. It's just fucking insane. This is Worst Unusual Deaths, number 17. Viewer discretion is advised. Unfortunately, I do not have a confirmed photograph of the victim of the story. 68-year-old James Campbell lived in Cantonment, Florida with his wife, and they also had a dog. In January of 2013, James had gotten home in his 1995 Chevy van, and he had backed up the van to the gate. I guess they had a gate that he had to go out and manually open. So he obviously had to get out of the car to do so, and when he did so, their large boxer, who was just excited to see him come home, would run out, and he jumped in the van, and he somehow managed to get his paw pressed on the accelerator. And I guess his paw got stuck in that situation, and somehow the van then continued to back up, and it actually ran completely over James Campbell. And he was pinned underneath the van. Now, obviously, his wife kind of ran out there, saw what happened, and she managed to, safely drive the van off of him. But sadly, just shortly after paramedics arrived, James would be pronounced dead. Now, I'm not 100% positive how this actually happened, because I would assume the van was in park, but somehow, unfortunately, this did occur, and it's very unusual. You don't ever see anything like this, at least not with, the culprit being the dog. This is not their actual dog, by the way. I do not know what happened to the animal. I'm assuming everything was fine with the animal because it wasn't like an attack by him directly, but it's just a very unusual and very, very unfortunate story. This is Worst Unusual Deaths number 2. Viewer discretion is advised, and I'm going to need all of you to be on your best behavior. Hello, true crimerers. This is the story of Denver Lee St. Clair. Denver was a 58-year-old married man who lived in McLeod, Oklahoma. At the time of this story, his wife, Tresia, was at the hospital recovering from a surgery. Now, Tresia had a son, 33-year-old former U.S. Marine Brad Davis. In December of 2013, he was invited over to the home of his mother and stepfather to have a few drinks. They tossed back probably one too many, and they got into an argument over Brad's mother, Tresia. He claims that Denver had said something bad about his mom. Brad didn't like that. Now, Brad was living on a trailer on the same property as them. Mr. St. Clair claims that he owed him $4,000 for staying there, but he wasn't paying up. Brad's brother would say that he overheard Mr. St. Clair saying, "I'm going to go to that trailer and I'm going to pull Brad out by the throat." So in reality, there was already some bad blood between the two men. In December of 2013, the night they were having this argument, police would be called to the home. Brad says that he punched Mr. St. Clair and he knocked him out. And then, and this is where I need you all to be on your best behavior, Brad says he then took Mr. St. Clair's underwear and gave him an atomic wedgie by stretching the elastic over his head and face. This is a relatively common tactic by bullies, not something I don't think you see too much these days anymore. But believe it or not, he died from this. The underwear was stretched over his nose and mouth, and Mr. St. Clair suffocated and he died. Yes, his death was caused by an atomic wedgie. Yes, this is a true story. When police uncovered the bad blood between the two men, they realized this was likely not just a simple accident. Brad Davis was charged with the murder of his stepfather. He would end up pleading guilty to manslaughter and went in court and said, "I killed my stepfather with an atomic wedgie." Something I'm sure the courts have probably never heard before. He was then sentenced to 30 years in prison with no possibility of parole. If this series does anything, hopefully it's to show that you just need to be super careful with everything. The following story is considered one of the most horrific shark attacks in recorded history. And this is Worst Animal Attacks number 1, Shark Week edition. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here was Shirley Durdin of South Australia. At the time of this story in 1985, she was a 33-year-old mother of 4 children. On the afternoon of March 4th, 1985, Shirley and her family would go to Peak Bay in South Australia, which apparently is near Port Lincoln. Now, Shirley, her husband, and a friend of theirs were kind of halfway out in the bay. They were snorkeling for scallops. Their kids were there more towards the shore, just playing in the water. The waters that the 3 adults were in were only about 7 feet deep. The 3 adults then decided to swim back to shore. Shirley's husband and the friend made it back to the beach, but Shirley did not. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, a 20-foot-long great white shark leaps out of the water, and then it lands back in the water right near where Shirley is. But then the shark leaps back out of the water, and it happens to grab Shirley right by her waist, and she goes up in the air with the shark. When they both land, the shark bites her directly in half. Her husband, her friend, and her children witnessed as blood basically sprayed out of the shark's mouth, and they momentarily heard her screams of horror. Her husband and friend tried to swim back out to see if there was anything they could do, but it was obviously far, far too late. The shark had then grabbed her and literally just bit her head right off. So by the time the husband and friend got out there, all they saw was just her headless torso floating in the water. But that would not be for very long, as the great white shark then leapt out of the water again and grabbed her torso and swam back into the ocean. This shark had completely devoured the 33-year-old mother. There was nothing left of her. This was actually the first great white shark attack in Australia since 1974. These types of attacks are not common at all. As a matter of fact, by 2020 numbers at least, shark attacks unprovoked happen only about 50 times a year across the entire globe. Why this particular great white decided to attack her in such shallow waters, it's not really known. But something we always have to understand is that to the sharks, this is their home. We as humans are swimming in where they live. But regardless, the attack of Shirley Durdin was just one of the most horrific to ever happen. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, or in this case, a small explosion. Hello, true crimerers. This is Worst Unusual Deaths number 7. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here was 26-year-old Alexander Chechik of Russia. In 2017, he wanted to impress his friends by showing them a picture of a grenade he had. I have no clue what the text reads, but this is the image he sent them. Do you notice something unusual about this image? Are you, pulling anything out from this photo? Don't worry, I have a trained eye in this sort of thing. He pulled the pin out. He pulled the pin out of an active grenade. He did so while sitting in his car. He apparently told his friends, "Oh, don't worry, it's not going to explode." After he sent the photo and a couple of texts, he chucked the grenade next to him. I cannot show you the photo, even though all the images I've seen, thankfully, are blurred out. I guess you can call this a plot twist for him at least. The grenade exploded right next to him. According to one article I read, he had basically blown the bottom half of his body off. He would be found dead several moments later in his vehicle, and it was a gory mess. Because like I said, he had basically blown off his legs and everything below. I shouldn't have to remind you out there, especially you younger folk, don't try anything like that at home. Never pull the pin out of a grenade, whether you want to look cool to your friends or not. Don't do it. Hello, true crimerers. This is Worst Unusual Deaths number 13. Viewer discretion is advised. Richard Wertheim, who would actually go by Dick Wertheim, he was a tennis linesman for the American Tennis Association. On September 10th, 1983, at the U.S. Open, which was taking place in New York, he was the linesman for that event. And of course, they would sit on those, high chairs, like right in the middle. Tennis player Stefan Edberg, he would, do his serve, and it was a pretty, fast serve, but it went completely off course, and the tennis ball that he hit went directly towards Dick Wertheim, and it hit him directly in the crotch. And I'm sure most guys can tell you that being hit there is not pleasant, especially by a tennis serve that's going very fast. So when the ball struck him, he ended up falling backwards off of the chair. He would end up landing on top of his head, which would then knock him out. He suffered blunt force trauma, essentially, and he also ended up having some brain damage. Mr. Wertheim was then brought to the nearest hospital, and unfortunately, 5 days later, he would succumb and he passed away. And obviously, Mr. Edberg felt absolutely horrific for this. Dick Wertheim's family would end up suing the United States Tennis Association for over $2 million. They would end up losing that, however, because they determined that the tennis serve itself did not cause the death. It was the fall off of the chair and landing on his head that caused the death. But then I'm thinking, well, that wouldn't have happened had he not been hit in the groin with a tennis ball. The family was awarded $165,000, but then a Supreme Court in New York, they reversed that. So the family ended up getting nothing. And that is it for today's story. It's kind of a short one. This is Worst Unusual Deaths number 1. Viewer discretion is advised. And please click on the disclaimer comment there to see the video on how I expect everyone to act. At any rate, let's go. Snake soup is sort of a delicacy in Guangdong, China, and it's quite common to use the meat of a cobra. Now, when chefs do this, they apparently cut off the head of the snake first, apparently while it's still alive. Chef Peng Fan, whose picture I cannot find, unfortunately, was preparing such a dish in his restaurant in Guangdong, China. And first things first, he took a cleaver and he severed the head off the snake. 20 minutes later, he goes to grab the head of the snake to throw it in the garbage, when all of a sudden, the head bites him, and he was immediately injected with the neurotoxic venom. He let out a very loud scream where everyone in the restaurant heard. Now, in the restaurant, they don't have any anti-venom, so they called emergency services, but by the time they were able to pick up Peng Fan and bring him to the hospital, it was far too late. The toxin had gone through his body, it took over, and he died. A pretty painful death. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth did the head of a snake bite him? Well, according to experts, and this is something I honestly did not know. If you guys knew this, I'm sorry if I sound a little, ignorant, I guess. But a lot of reptiles can survive when you sever off a limb. I kind of knew that with, like, tails and stuff, but snakes can live for up to 1 hour after you cut its head off. It can still function. And that's a fear I didn't know I possessed until this very moment. And I live in the desert. This is Worst Animal Attacks number 2. Viewer discretion is advised. Today's story takes us to the Johannesburg Zoo, which is located in South Africa. Now, the zoo actually opened in 1904, so it's been around for quite some time. And the entirety of the zoo is about 200 acres. At any given time, they usually have about 2,000 wild animals in the zoo, and that is with roughly 320 different species. Now, unfortunately, I cannot find a confirmed photo of the victim. His name was Joe Ramonitha, and he had worked at the zoo since 1970. Wow, that is a beautiful animal. This is actually a white lioness, and her name is Nyanga. So Joe was in the process of feeding the lions and the lionesses. Now, usually when you're feeding animals like this, precautions are in place. In particular, gates need to be closed. Sadly, what the zoo would describe as an unfortunate case of human error, one of the gates was left open. And this was during the time that Joe was feeding the animals. He was beginning to walk down a corridor that was meant for the zoo employees, when all of a sudden he was met face to face with Nyanga. Witnesses would describe that they heard the screams coming from that area, and as they rushed over, they saw Nyanga essentially on top of Joe Ramonitha. She had bit directly into his throat, and there was blood everywhere. She had a very firm grip on his neck, and then when the other zookeepers approached, she backed off. They were able to safely contain Nyanga without shooting her, which sometimes happens, but when paramedics arrived, the zookeeper was dead. It appeared she had taken just one giant bite out of his throat. Judging by the timing of the screams and when they arrived, he was probably only suffering for a minute or so. So then they had to make a decision, what do we do with Nyanga? Sometimes, unfortunately, they put these animals down after an attack like this. Come at me all you want for defending the animal, but I'm going to defend the animal. I'm very happy to say that Nyanga was chosen to be spared. They would remove her from the zoo and she was sent to a different, sanctuary type place where she would be allowed to continue to live. Now, obviously, the death of this zookeeper is tragic. It's sad. He did not deserve it. But, when we're putting these wild animals in cages, essentially, these types of things are likely to happen. Now, this was the first animal attack at the zoo in 50 years, so it's not something that happens super often there. I do not know if anyone was held responsible, however, for leaving the gate open. I was today years old when I found out that Thanksgiving wasn't all just fun and games, but murderous poultry does exist. Baka baka, true crimerers. This is Worst Unusual Deaths, number 15. Mother plucking, viewer discretion is advised. Cockfighting. Well, it's a funny word, but also it's illegal here in the United States of America. But unfortunately, it still happens. In Bakersfield, California in 2011, there was a cockfighting match going on. 35-year-old Jose Luis Ochoa, whose picture I cannot find, was there at this particular event. He had been cited before and charged before with organizing these events, but it didn't stop him from doing this. He wanted a leg up on this particular match. So the rooster he was using was strapped. I shit you not, his rooster, he put a knife, a blade, on its leg. Well, then the rooster went cuckoo, ka-choo, and it started to run towards, the crowd. It then lifted its leg and it slashed Jose Ochoa directly in the back of his leg. Pretty badly. It actually caused him to bleed pretty profusely. I don't know what happened to the chicken after this, but Mr. Ochoa did not go to the hospital for at least 2 more hours. He didn't think it was a big deal, but he continued to bleed. So after about 2 hours, he finally went to the hospital where he would end up bleeding to death. He waited too long. So because he decided he wanted to strap his chicken with a blade, it would end his life. Please, stop doing this. Thank you. This is Worst Unusual Deaths, number 5. Hello, true crimerers. Viewer discretion is advised. Unfortunately, I do not have any photos of the victim in this case. This story happened in Chalmette, Louisiana in April of 1982. A 26-year-old man by the name of Mike Scaglione was out golfing. One of the most peaceful sports you could play, but it does bring out the angry side of a lot of people. It was Easter Sunday of 1982, and he was at the City Park golf course there in Louisiana. Mike's friends said he did have a bit of a temper, especially when he was playing golf, especially when things weren't going his way. So what led to this particular angry outburst, it's not really known, but he did become angry on the golf course that day. He took his golf club and he threw it against the golf cart that he was using. He threw it with such force that the golf club itself ricocheted back and it hit him directly in the jugular. It actually ended up severing his jugular vein. Now, he was rushed to the hospital where he was actually in good condition, but the following day, his injuries would get worse and he slipped into a coma, and then he died. One story I read said it was actually just a piece of the golf club that broke off and hit him in the throat, and another story says it was his actual, like, just the full golf club, but I don't know which one of those is true. It's just that the only thing I know is that his golf club or part of it whacked him in the throat. Hopefully hearing a story like this might help people who have anger issues, especially on the golf course or any sport. Just know that crazy things can happen when you are very heated. So please be careful. She loved animals with all her being, and she wanted nothing more than to preserve their habitats. But unfortunately, that would come at a cost. Hello, true crimerers. This is Worst Animal Attacks number 4, and it is the story of Jenna O'Grady Donnelly. Viewer discretion is advised. Jenna was actually just a week away from graduating, and this was from the University of Sydney, and specifically their Faculty of Veterinary Science part. She had recently won an award in pathology. Her biggest, I guess you can say, success in the field was her work on renal failure in big cats. And apparently it was really good work, and, hopefully they're using what she learned in her research to further along her story and her legacy. Jenna was also very much about preserving the animals' natural habitats and making sure that these animals were taken care of when need be and that they were never mistreated. She was fearless, she would go side to side with big old cats and elephants and other large animals, but her mother would also describe her as someone who was not reckless at all. She was very careful. She was a very prepared person when dealing with these large animals. So a week before her graduation, she was actually in Borneo, which is in Malaysia. Brings me back to my Survivor Season 1 days. And she was there with a friend, and they had a tour guide. They noticed that there were some elephants nearby, and more specifically, some of the rare pygmy elephants. And she went to snap a photo, and it's believed, but not known for sure, but the sound may have startled the elephants. Because all of a sudden, one of these giant, pygmy elephants began to charge towards their group. And what happened was, this elephant came straight for Jenna, and its tusk went right through her from back to out the front. She was impaled through the chest by one of these tusks, and it's said that this would have killed her instantly. And for what it's worth, I hope it was instant, because I hope she wouldn't have to feel anything painful. But her friend and the tour guide, because this all happened so fast, they were able to, get away, and they escaped successfully. And they had to wait a little while in order to even retrieve Jenna's body. But it happened like that. It was just so quick. No matter how prepared you are, you may never be prepared enough. This is Worst Unusual Deaths number 4. And yeah, it involves goats. Viewer discretion is advised. Oh, and hello, true crimerers. You guys get so upset when I don't say it. This young man was 13-year-old Haval Yildirim, and he lived in Turkey here in this apartment building. And his family are Muslim. And apparently there is a festival called Eid al-Adha. And a part of that festival, as a part of the Muslim faith, they will sacrifice a sheep or a goat as like being thankful for blessings. They then cook the animal and then disperse it equally. Now, the family lived in a small apartment, so Haval's father kept the goat that he had purchased for the festival on the roof of the building. There was a small fenced enclosure up there that they placed the goat in, but at some point, somehow, the goat escaped. Playing with his friends just below was the 13-year-old boy, Haval. The goat, trying to escape a sacrifice, fell off the roof and sadly landed on the son of the man who purchased the goat, Haval. The goat would die on impact, and Haval would die shortly after in the hospital. This is sort of an unprecedented case because this is not something you really ever hear of happening. I remember I told a story a while back about the cow who fell through a man's roof and landed on top of him while he was sleeping. So it technically, something like this has happened before, but this still is pretty genuinely unusual. And you just feel so bad for Haval and for his friends that had to witness this happen. I just can't imagine that's something that you would ever recover from mentally. Warning! Do not try what you are about to hear at home. And I feel like that should go without saying, but here we are. Hello, true crimerers. This is Worst Unusual Deaths, and that's me being kind. Number 14. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here was 24-year-old Zafer Kuzu, and he lived in Turkey. Back in 2019, he was arrested for and convicted of some charge they called wounding, and he was sentenced to community service. He wanted to avoid doing community service, so he came up with a brilliant idea. His idea was to strap 2 pillows to his back, and then he asked a friend, and wow, what a friend this is, to take a shotgun and shoot him through the back, through the pillows. You know, to soften the blow and to, not kill him. Usually it's the easiest thing to be very respectful to victims. But come on. Zafer's plan was that this would cause some possibly major injuries that wouldn't end his life, but it would force him to be hospitalized, which would then get him out of community service. I guess he wasn't thinking that maybe after he was hospitalized, he would then go back to community service. So the friend put the gun directly into the pillows. This was close range, fired the gun, and believe it or not, the pellets went through the pillow and then through Zafer. He, of course, fell down in horrific pain and he was already bleeding profusely. His friends tried to load him into the vehicle to take him to the hospital as quickly as possible, but it was already too late. Before they even got him out of the house, he had died. The friend, who was 18 years old, was arrested and he was convicted. But I don't know exactly what his sentence was, but he is in jail for this. Y'all, again, this should go without saying, but if it even crosses your mind to do something like this, slap yourself across the face first. Don't ever try this sort of thing ever, anywhere. Not just at home, but anywhere. Clearly, it is not worth it. This is Worst Unusual Deaths number 8. Viewer discretion is advised. I am making the decision to leave the man's name out of this story, but it is a verified story, so feel free to look it up afterwards. This story takes place in 1996 in Hampshire, England. A man had gone to a doctor to ask about his problem with snoring. The doctors told him there was really nothing they could do about it. So the man and his girlfriend came up with their own solution. The solution, not only was he going to be sleeping on the couch, he would also take tampons and shove them up each nostril. From what I understand, this particular evening, he had put them very far up his nose. The girlfriend went upstairs to go to bed in her room, and when she woke up the following morning, her boyfriend was dead on the couch. Both tampons were still up his nose in the same position they were when he went to bed. He also took 2 sleeping tablets that night, so he was a little extra knocked out. So his cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation due to the tampons up his nose. The coroner would also say the sleeping tablets may have attributed to breathing issues that night as well. The girlfriend would say that prior to this, happening, that her and her boyfriend would kind of laugh about this. They would joke about it. They thought it was silly, obviously, with a man putting tampons up his nose. But when she discovered him dead, she was just beyond horrified. Please do not try this at home, and only ever take advice from an actual medical professional. A man would come back to his cabin in Canada, and he was attacked by a bear. He pulled out his gun, he shot the bear dead. But what he found after was nothing short of a nightmare. Hello, true crimerers. This is Worst Animal Attacks number 3. Viewer discretion is advised. This was 37-year-old Valerie Deodorant and her 10-month-old daughter, Adele. In November of 2018, they were at the Yukons, which is in the Saskatchewan area of Canada, I believe. They were there with Valerie's partner and the baby's father, Guillermond. They had gone to this cabin many times. They were very familiar with the area, and because it was the winter time, bears are usually in hibernation, but it's not extremely out of the question that there may be some bears still roaming. So that being said, they were extremely prepared for this possibility. They were setting up traps all around their cabin. They made sure to clean everything up nice and tidy and left no food out to not, so they're not attracting any potential bears to their campsite. They took every single precaution you should take just in case a bear may come into the area. On November 26, 2018, Guillermond had gone out of the cabin and he was going to go check on all of the surrounding traps. Now, he was out of the cabin for a couple of hours. When he gets back to it, he is approached by a grizzly bear. First he hears like the growls of the bear, and then he kind of looks over and like, holy shit, the bear is right there. At first he's trying to just like stay still, do all the tricks he needs to do to, not get attacked by this bear, but the bear runs directly at him. It charges directly in his direction, and he is going to attack Guillermond. So Guillermond had a gun on him, and he had to fire shots at the bear, and he did end up killing it. He didn't want to do it. It was not his intent to kill a bear, but he had to protect his life, and all he knows is he's also protecting the lives of his girlfriend and their baby. When he approaches the surrounding area of the cabin, he comes across a scene that no one should ever have to come across. Valerie and the 10-month-old baby Adele were on the ground, and they had been mauled to death. The baby was in a carrier which was on Valerie's back, and they had a bunch of, claw marks going through them, and they were also bitten numerous times, and they were essentially fed on. When the RCMP and the local wildlife people arrived, they would eventually do an autopsy on the bear, and they found a porcupine inside the bear, and the needles of the porcupine were essentially stabbing the insides of the bear, which was causing the bear not to be able to eat food, but was also extremely hungry. So the conclusion they came to was that Valerie and the baby and Guillermond, they were all extremely prepared for this, but this is one of those situations where there was literally nothing that could have been done, because it appeared the bear had been lurking and almost stalking Valerie and the baby as they were doing just like a little walk around the cabin. The bear was probably hiding and then pounced at the right moment for it to go after what it was essentially a food source for the bear, because the bear was desperate for food. There was just nothing Valerie could have done. She didn't even know it was right about to happen. I just hope for both of them, especially the baby, that it happened very quickly and that they didn't really feel any pain. Gearman has to live with that trauma as well. Deodorant can kill you. Did you know that? Hello, true crimeers. This is Worst Unusual Deaths number 3. Viewer discretion is advised. Unfortunately, I cannot find the photo of the individual involved here. But 16-year-old Jonathan Capewell lived in the UK. And in October of 1998, he was found dead in his room. His cause of death would ultimately be ruled a heart attack. But what led a seemingly healthy 16-year-old to suddenly die of heart attack? Deodorant. According to his family, Jonathan was obsessed with using deodorant. He would spray himself top to bottom twice a day. It was so strong and so bad that his parents and his sister on the first floor of the house could not only smell the deodorant, but they could taste it. That is how much he used it. Allegedly, he used deodorant excessively in replace of taking a shower, claiming he just really wanted to smell good. The interesting thing is when you are spraying deodorant in a small space like a bathroom, and this is like gases coming out of this stuff. We're talking butane, isobutane, and propane. A potentially lethal dose of any one of them is 0.1 milligrams, and that's per liter of blood. After testing Jonathan's blood, he had 0.37 liters of butane. This is one of those things that personally I did not know could actually happen. Like, I knew there were, chemicals and gases in this, but I never really thought that this kind of stuff can kill you in excess. It should also be noted that this is extremely rare. Most people are very careful about how they use it. It sounded like Jonathan was literally just like literally from head to toe, full on spray twice a day. And unbeknownst to him, he was actually inhaling a lot of it. And all of those gases he was inhaling would then lead to his heart failing. So the best thing for any of us to do while using spray deodorant, as silly as this may sound, just take a peek at the directions on the bottle and follow those. Now, I have never heard of this happening before, so this is certainly, for me, one of the most unusual deaths I've ever heard about. This is Worst Unusual Deaths number 16. Viewer discretion is advised. And this one will be a pretty quick story. I do not have a photo of the victim in this case, but this story takes place in Sofia, Bulgaria. Lydia Tiskova, who was a teacher there in Sofia, she and her husband and a colleague of hers were out near a sewer drain like this. I don't know why they were doing this, but they were pouring hazardous chemicals into the drain through the manhole cover because it had slots. Unbeknownst to them, the chemicals were reacting with the gases inside the sewer just below. Within just a few minutes of them starting to pour the chemicals down, there was a massive explosion. The explosion would cause the manhole cover, which is extremely heavy, to rocket out of its position, and standing just above it was Lydia Tiskova. When the manhole cover shot up, it actually came into contact through her neck, and it completely decapitated her right then and there. Her husband and colleague would survive the explosion, but they did experience some pretty significant injuries. Again, I have no idea why they were pouring hazardous chemicals into a sewer. Needless to say, folks, please do not ever try that anywhere, including at home. Gender reveal parties are all the rage these days, but some have ended in catastrophic failures. Hello, true crimeers. This is Worst Unusual Deaths number 12. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here was 66-year-old Pamela Kreimeier of Des Moines, Iowa. She had recently discovered that she was about to be a new grandma. And of course, she was very excited. So they would be throwing a gender reveal party at their home. And this is specifically in, in Knoxville, Iowa, which is a little outside of Des Moines. Now, me, I have never understood the hype and the concept of gender reveal parties. Like, you're having a biological boy or biological girl at birth. It's basically one or the other, so... And I've always wondered, like, are you not gonna cheer if a color comes out that you don't want? Isn't that kind of awkward? I don't know, I don't get them. I don't understand the crazy hype over them, but anyway, I digress. People come up with all sorts of crazy ways to reveal the gender. There have been many explosive ways done, and that's exactly what the Crimerer family was doing in this case. What they did was they filled a giant metal tube, and it was welded to a metal plate here at the bottom. They then drilled a hole to put the fuse in, and then they put a chunk of cardboard over that, I guess. They then filled it with the colored powder of whatever gender the baby was, and the bottom portion was filled with gunpowder. And then, apparently the deadliest mistake they did here was they covered the very top with a thick layer of tape. And essentially what they did was that turned it into a makeshift pipe bomb. When they lit the fuse, they all basically stood back, and Pamela was about 45 feet away. But it did not shoot powder from the top like they planned. It basically caused this entire metal structure to explode. And shrapnel was sent everywhere. And Pamela, she was struck directly in the head with one of these metal pieces of shrapnel, and then that piece of metal flew another 100+ yards or so. That's the strength and the power it had. And unfortunately, it killed her instantly. Obviously, the family was devastated by this, but you just don't go to extremes for something like a gender reveal party. I mean, it happens so often. There was one that started a huge, fire a couple years ago. Stop. I hope she is resting in peace, and I do not know the gender of the baby. This is worst animal attacks, number 5. It's also kind of a freak accident. I don't really know what to call it, but it's a fucking insane and tragic story. Viewer discretion is advised. In June of 2011, there were people driving down Quebec Highway 148, which apparently this was just outside of Ottawa, when all of a sudden, and I swear to God, this sounds like a movie scene, but this has actually happened. A black bear, which would be uncommon at this time of the year to be roaming across a freeway, it roamed into the road, and one car, a Pontiac Sunfire, smashed into the bear. The bear flew into the air, and then, I don't even understand the physics of this, but the bear then flew across the other section of the highway towards the opposite flow of traffic, and then it smashed through an SUV. It would actually crash through the car's front windshield and literally flew across the back seat and then out the back window of the car. The driver of the car and the passenger that was sitting just behind them, they would be declared dead at the scene. The other passengers in this car and the initial car were all injured, but they, walked away with their lives. The bear, which flew through 2 different cars, would also die from the incident. And it all sounds like this happened within just a matter of seconds. So I can't even I can't even fathom what would be going through the minds of these people as they're seeing this occur. But it is believed that the 2 people who did die died instantly, so they weren't suffering or in any kind of pain, at least. But this is just, it's crazy. This is worst unusual deaths, number 6. Viewer discretion is advised. Unfortunately, once again, I cannot find a photo of the victim that seems to be pretty consistent in stories like this. But this story takes place in 2016 in Mexico City, Mexico. 17-year-old Julio Macias Gonzalez was making out with his girlfriend. Eventually, she would give him a couple hickeys on his neck. To those who don't know, it's essentially when someone is suckling on typically your neck. And usually when that happens, it will leave a small bruise. You know, something similar to this mark there. A hickey is basically a broken blood vessel, and usually they're very harmless. And also usually they are a form of embarrassment for after the fact. But in this incredibly rare instance, for the 17-year-old boy, the hickey was done so powerfully that not only did it cause the typical bruising, but it also caused a blood clot. A couple of hours after this was done, he went home, he had some dinner with his family, when all of a sudden he began to convulse on the ground. Julio appeared to be having something like a seizure, so they called emergency services, and when they got there, sadly, he was pronounced dead. So what happened was the blood clot that was formed when he received the hickey earlier in the day, it actually spread to his brain, which would cause the very young 17-year-old to have a stroke. This is one of the only recorded deaths that are related directly to a hickey, but in 2011, there was another instance where a woman became partially paralyzed after having a stroke that was caused by a hickey. In her case, it damaged a major artery. So take this, I guess, as a cautionary tale. No, you're not very likely to die from a hickey. Do anyone even do those anymore? But it can happen, technically, because it has. So just always be very mindful. His family would sacrifice a lamb for his good health. 5 days later, this would happen. Hello, true crimerers. This is Worst Unusual Deaths, number 11. Viewer discretion is advised. Just real quick before we get going, please make sure you are subscribed to my YT channel, red play button. The link's in my link tree, or you can click the Instagram icon on my profile, and then the YT page will show up too. This was 20-year-old Richard Pananian of Burbank, California. He and his family were a part of the Armenian Church, and Richard was going through some unfortunate health issues. What those health concerns were not made public. On October 25th, 2015, the family, as part of Armenian tradition, would sacrifice a lamb so that he could find good health and recovery. 5 days later, Richard was starting a brand new job, and this was at the Glendale Collision Center. Now, according to eyewitnesses, Richard was driving sort of erratically on the 5 freeway. He was going southbound. He was in his Ford Fiesta, apparently, I guess, swerving in and out of lanes, when all of a sudden, he smashed into the back of a pickup truck. His car would basically start to flip. As his car was flipping, Richard was ejected out of the front windshield, and he flew into the Colorado Street freeway sign, and he would hit the sign with some pretty strong force. When he hit the sign, he would suffer from an extreme amount of blunt force trauma. Not to mention the initial impact also created some blunt force trauma. From what I understand, the driver of the truck he hit came out unscathed. However, Richard would be found deceased, lying here on this part of the sign. Why he was driving recklessly, no one knows. Anytime you see someone driving recklessly on the freeway, it is always advised to safely call 911 and let them know. This is certainly a freak accident, but I also think it qualifies as Worst Unusual Deaths, number 10. Viewer discretion is advised. And hello, true crimerers. Can't forget that. This was 28-year-old Erica Marshall from Ocala, Florida. She had just recently gotten married to her husband, Kieran. The two of them had actually met studying equine sciences. They were both huge lovers of horses. And that's what Erica did. She worked with horses. Specifically, she was an equine therapist. On February 10th, 2012, she was treating a horse, and that required to put the horse inside of a hyperbaric chamber. From what I understand, they're kind of like a pressure chamber. And I know that oxygen is involved, and I honestly don't know all of the sciences behind it. So she sealed the horse inside, and inside were like padded walls, I guess. The horse that she was treating this particular day had been in there about 4 or 5 times before, and Erica was extremely familiar with using this. From what I understand, they did not sedate the horse, which I guess is sometimes common to do. But I believe she made that decision because this horse had no issues in the past. There was like a video link inside, and that's how she was watching what was going on in another room. Now, the walls inside had like a thin layer of padding, and apparently this time, the horse got a little spooked. So it started kicking its hooves against the wall, which actually tore away some of the padding. And it exposed the metal wall of the chamber. And then the horse kicked again. And this time, the metallic horseshoe it was wearing scraped against the metal wall. And it created a spark which immediately ignited the oxygen. And then an explosion that could be heard from 30 miles away. Witnesses said that the debris from the explosion launched like 200 feet into the air. It was found, hundreds of feet away from the building, and this is exactly what it looked like. And this is the chamber right here. The horse, obviously, sadly died immediately. And Erica Marshall, who was just in the room next to it, she died in the explosion. She was so close to where this all happened, so the likelihood is she too died instantly. There was another woman on the property, but she was far away enough that she was able to survive, but she did experience some minor injuries. Erica was described as someone who was just a person who would go above and beyond for anyone, but especially for animals. She never wanted anything for herself because she always wanted to make sure that the animals were taken care of, and the people in her life as well. She died while doing something that she was extremely passionate about, helping animals. Her husband said that Erica wouldn't want anyone fussing about all of this, but she definitely deserves the fuss.